Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of the Justice for Girls staff team, Executive Director Ann Muno and Program Coordinator Tristan Eddy, the JFG board, and the JFG community, we welcome you to the 6th annual Beyond Pink Summit. Woohoo! So exciting. I imagine you're all clapping on your mute. Awesome. Super excited to see you all today. My name's Jaya Duckworth, and I am from Seattle, and I originally started working with Justice for Girls as a student at Garfield High School with some of the other lovely student facilitators who are here today. I'm currently a sophomore at Occidental College in LA, and at Garfield, I started working on the Congress of Racial Equity, and that's where I got a lot of start doing like social justice and advocacy work that I'm super passionate about and continuing to do with JFG and in college. So I'm really excited to be here at my second Beyond Pink. We want to start by extending a huge thank you to the Washington State Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice for sponsoring today's event and investing in Washington State girls. So thank you to the sponsors. And then just for some Zoom logistics and tech assistance, please mute your mics, but feel free to share your video. It's really nice to see your lovely faces. This session is recorded and parts of it may be shared, so we just want you to be aware of that. If you'd like, you can change your name by clicking participants and then the rename button. And there you can enter your name and your pronouns and your organization. You can also use the chat box at any time if you have any questions, and Tristan Eddy will be on tech support if you have any issues with audio or video or anything like that. Also, we'd love if you use the reactions button on the bottom right. You can use emojis to affirm, uplift, second, agree, all of that kind of stuff when others are speaking. And then just remember to please provide self-care and take any breaks as you need throughout our session today. So this is just an overview of today's events. We're going to start with like a welcome and some logistics stuff. We'll have an awesome youth speaker at around 9:30. At 9:45, you'll hear about some Justice for Girls data we've collected. At 10, our keynote speaker, Sharice, will be speaking. And then we'll have about a 2-hour break for lunch, and we'll resume the afternoon session at 1 p.m. And then we'll have a youth speaker again, a training, and then we'll close out around 3:30. So we hope you join us for as much of the programming as we have planned for today, but please feel free to leave and rejoin as your schedule allows. It'll be the same Zoom link for the duration of the event, so you can just click on that to rejoin. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Amara.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Can y'all hear me? Get some thumbs up. All right, amazing. My name's Amara Andreessen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here at Garfield High School. So same school that Jay went to, same school that Haley also went to. You'll meet her later. But yeah, so I'm a part of a lot of student leadership programs such as student government and as well like in the Congress of Racial Equity at Garfield High School. So a lot of these like organizations that I've been involved have kind of made me develop a meaningful sense of community. So which is why I'm especially excited to be here today. I really like networking, reaching out, meeting other people, learning from their experiences. It just, I love that. So yeah, outside of all my programs, I like to do some art, just kind of relax, take care of myself, play sports, and also watch a lot of my TV shows. All right, next, please. So we'd like to talk a little bit about all the people who are registered for the event. Historically, Beyond Pink has been a day of convening girl-serving advocates and youth professionals from across Washington State to train in person. However, in light of the pandemic, we joined with countless other organizations to a digital conference model. Even though we are sad we won't be able to see you in person this year, we are full of gratitude that this online format has reduced barriers to attendance for so many people who wouldn't have been able to attend otherwise. We have folks registered today who care about youth from 101 different schools and organizations who provide youth development, health, mental health, nonprofit services, child welfare, housing, juvenile court, juvenile rehabilitation, and higher education. Woo, 101, wow. All right, and we also dedicate space today to improving safety and preventing violence for more than 800,000 girls and the age of 8 in Washington State, and nearly 17 million girls under the age of 18 who collectively live in California, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, Missouri, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, Washington, D.C., and Virginia. Woohoo! So we're so ecstatic that everyone is here today. And yeah, we also have a really cool thing that I'm going to talk about right now. Next, please. Oh yeah, Tristan data from, and then there's a link there. Perfect. We are so excited. Oh, this is so cool. When I looked at this, I was like, ooh, these are these are really cute. I like that purple one. Anyways, we are so excited to announce that all Beyond Pink registrants and people who attend both the AM and PM sessions will be automatically entered into a raffle to win beautifully handcrafted blown glass pieces from the youth artists involved in the Hilltop Artist Program in Tacoma. You will be automatically entered into this raffle, and we will contact the winners next week. Next, please. We would also like to take a moment to uplift the Artist Connect program at Hilltop Artists. If you had never heard of it before, Arts Connect is an arts-based intervention and recidivism prevention program for young women ages 12 to 18 who are involved in the Pierce County juvenile court system. Arts Connect is currently offering virtual programming serving up to 24 youth per quarter. We invite you to support this incredible art program by participating virtually in their winter glass sale from December 5th to December 17th, 2020 by visiting their online store at www.hilltopartist.org/online store. All right, so at all JFG trainings and events, we like to establish a set of community norms, community agreements, since we are a community here, and we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And they are as follows. I statements, so we want to make sure that we're speaking from our own experiences, our own personal experiences today. Listen, seems like everyone's doing great at that. Be present, just kind of, it's a very basic skill, but it's necessary to learn from each other, right? And to actively connect with each other as well. Confidentiality, so what's said here stays here, and what's learned here leaves. Acknowledge your privilege. So please recognize the ways you may be privileged. And this kind of goes up to step up, step back, and monitoring your space. Be sure to monitor your space when we are talking. So that means if you notice that you've been talking a lot, feel free to give other folks some time to contribute to the conversation. If you aren't talking as much and you would like to add something, please, we want to hear your voice. We want to hear what you have to say. We really encourage everyone to be involved in our discussions there. Also, literacy check or lit check, because literacy can be a hard word to say sometimes. We want to make this event accessible in all ways. So that includes language accessibility. So if we say something that you're not sure what it means, or if that you're not quite sure, like, how do I apply this? You can always use the chat box to say lit check. And we will, in the moment, we will try to define what you may need so that you can get better context for the situation. Tristan will now launch a poll. If you agree to these terms, please select I agree. If you have something else to add, please use the chat box and we can add that to your list. Again, this is a growing list. We are a community, so if someone in our community has something to say, we're more than glad to listen to what you all would like to add to this. All right, poll numbers are going up. Perfect. All right. Looking like we all agree. Thank you all for participating in that. Just one more note too. Please use trigger warnings as we go throughout our program. We will be speaking about some sensitive topics relating to violence, sexual violence, and mental health issues, to name a few. So with that too, please also take care of yourself, as Jay had mentioned, and feel free to take a break whenever you need or even leave the session. At the end of the presentation and via email, we provide a list of resources for you all today. Now, I would love to pass it to my colleague, Haley.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, awesome. My name is Haley Gray. I'm a sophomore at UC Berkeley, and I'm majoring in legal studies and minoring in ethnic studies. In high school, I attended Garfield High School like Jaya and Amara, and I worked on our school's Congress of Racial Equity, and that's how I started getting involved with more advocacy and social justice work. And at the coalition, I serve as a youth Program and Training Facilitator. Next slide, please. So before we really get into the bulk of our material, we just wanted to do a little bit of a grounding or breathing exercise, just so that way we can really center ourselves in this space today. So we're just going to use this as a time to kind of take a minute and check in with yourself, see how you're doing. So first, if everyone just wants to adjust themselves into a comfortable sitting position, you can close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. And I just want everyone to take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And I just want everyone to continue taking deep breaths and bring awareness to what you might be feeling right now, what you might be sensing, what you might be thinking, where your mind is wandering. And just really take this moment to check in with yourself, see how you're feeling, and really take a moment to just relax. And after taking these moments to check in with yourself, I want you to expand your awareness to your outside surroundings. So maybe begin noticing what you're hearing around you, what you might be feeling around you, what you might be seeing around you. And just take a chance to really center yourself in your environment and recognize what's going on around you and how it's impacting you. All right, so now as you kind of bring your awareness back to the group, you can open your eyes, and I encourage you guys to type in the chat box and say how this exercise went for you, how you felt at the beginning versus how you feel now. Do you feel more relaxed? Did it have any impact on you? And feel free to just share any perspectives that you have. I see some people saying they feel much calmer. Miss Tristan saying she had too much coffee. Helping to relax people, recenter. It's awesome. I'm super glad. This is a really good exercise just to feel a little bit more grounded and help you kind of focus yourself throughout the day. So thank you all for participating and sharing all of your perspectives. So in light of this exercise and the importance of providing self-care, we encourage you guys to engage in this interactive online puzzle game. So all Beyond Pink attendees can collaboratively work on this puzzle throughout the day if you just need to take a moment to de-stress and reflect. And you can visit the link bit.ly/beyondpuzzle, which Ms. Tristan has put in the chat box for you all. Okay, next slide, please. And now we would like to introduce our incredible Justice for Girls Board President, Danielle Miller, to tell us more about our organization and our mission.
Well, I was at mine, but that shit was.
And welcome to Beyond Pink 6. I'm Danielle Miller, and as Haley mentioned, I'm the chair of the board for the Justice for Girls Coalition. So before I tell you more about the coalition, I just want to thank you all for being here today. With all that has happened this year and all the adjustments we've needed to make in order to adapt to all of it, I'm so grateful that we were still able to create space for this event. Your support and engagement in this work is so important for us, and as you know, much more important for the youth we strive to impact. So again, thank you for your time and engagement today. Some of you are quite familiar with our work, and for those of you that we're just getting acquainted with, I'd like to share a quick overview of who we are. The Justice for Girls Coalition is a statewide advocacy and training nonprofit, and the coalition's work and much of the work of this summit today is on centering marginalized girls in our efforts to improve systems. Centering systems change on girls and organizing as a community to support girls is at the heart of why the coalition formed roughly a decade ago. Back then, a small group of advocates, academics, and court administrators from across the state were asked to testify in Olympia, Washington, on trends in the treatment of girls, specifically in the juvenile justice system. A powerful takeaway they had after that testimony was that the trends were very unclear and that a great deal of collaborative work was needed. That's why the coalition formed back then, as a group of statewide volunteers trying to really spark a change. In the years since forming, we have learned that across our state, efforts to create more effective programs and practices that are responsive to girls' needs are growing. However, funding to evaluate or scale these efforts is frequently unavailable. We know that girls' pathway into the juvenile justice system often stems from surviving abuse, especially sexual violence. We also know that racialized and gender-biased pathways push girls out of school and into court contact. Finally, we know that when a girl ends up court or dual system involved, there were multiple other systems with whom she'd had contact where interventions could have potentially interrupted that court contact in the first place. With all that said, we know more now, and we are poised to do more. About 3 years ago, with the support of a federal National Girls Innovation Grant, we received our 501c3 status and expanded our scope to include advocacy and training across multiple systems, which includes schools, mental health, housing, child care or child welfare, and juvenile justice. The coalition's focus is to build public will through policy, advocacy, community organizing, model programs, and training. Way back in 2016, which feels like forever now, I, like you, attended the Beyond Pink Summit and was reminded how critical it is to have an advocacy and training organization like the Justice for Girls Coalition. I joined the board shortly after and have thoroughly enjoyed working with a passionate group of women that advocate and push for better experiences for girls on a daily basis. I'd like to shout out the board members that are here today. Thank you, as always, for all that you do. While I'm acknowledging fanners of the flame, I also want to thank today's event sponsor, the Washington State Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice, and many other generous individuals. We really, really couldn't do this work without you, so thank you so much. Lastly, one important value we share as a coalition is gathering together with the spirit of respect. How we gather matters a great deal in terms of what we accomplish. So in that spirit, I want to acknowledge that although many of you are located all over Washington and the US, we are hosting this event in Seattle, and it is important that we acknowledge with gratitude that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, the people that continue to honor and bring light to their ancient heritage amidst the traumatic and disproportionate impact the COVID pandemic is having on Native communities and communities of color. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. Acknowledgement is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. The Justice for Girls Coalition also honors the Duwamish tribe as first people of Seattle by contributing to Real Rent Duwamish. Descendants of European settler families continue to benefit greatly from the resources of the land incorporating the city we know as Seattle. Those of us who are not from the tribes of these lands continue to benefit in many different ways from being here, whether we live, work, or visit this beautiful place. As guests to this land, we can create a story of equity and action instead of being complicit in dishonoring the treaties. To learn which native land you live on, please visit native-land.ca, and we'll put that in the chat for you. Also, if you'd like to learn more about how to support the initiative as well, we'll be sharing a link in the summit proceedings for your reference. And thank you again for attending today, and we hope you enjoy Beyond Pink. Good morning and welcome.
All right, thank you, Ms. Danielle. And now we would like to share a little context about how Beyond Pink, JFG statewide summit, got its name. So over a decade ago, we named the event Beyond Pink because we wanted to challenge the idea that slapping a little pink paint on the walls of a detention center or providing fluffy pink pillows in an after-school program means that you get high marks for centering the needs of girls. So today's summit, Preventing Violence Against Girls and Gender Expansive Youth, provides a rare and vitally important event to explore the following: data in our state that can help engage and mobilize community members in our work, make improvements in our programs so they are organized to strengthen how we engage girls and our community in preventing violence, and impacts the community advocates are having to shift social norms to prevent gender-based violence. So our incredible keynote speakers, youth speakers, and trainer will provide fresh ideas how to engage communities and girls in driving solutions to social change, and how to work with girls in a way that strengthens the inherent power that they possess. So we hope that you all take away inspiration and practical ways to engage and support colleagues. We hope by hearing and seeing what's new, that you'll leave with the desire and a commitment to join efforts of the coalition as we grow. Next slide, please. I now have the pleasure of introducing our first youth speaker, Chardonnay Beaver. Chardonnay is a 19-year-old incredible public speaker. A fun fact about her is that she can get anywhere in Manhattan or Queens, New York to Harlem. Today, she will be sharing her words and stories with us. Please join me in welcoming Chardonnay.
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? Awesome. It's so good to see your guys' lovely faces this morning. And I first want to start off by thanking Justice for Girls for not only the opportunity, but the platform in which they use to really support girls. And that is gender inclusive, but really support girls. And I want to begin by saying that I see you. I see you, I acknowledge you, I appreciate you, I value you. I know sometimes there's sacrifices made that don't and are underlooked. They don't get seen and they are underlooked and they're underappreciated. It could be from not receiving the right amount of pay on your job because of your race and your gender. It could be not being answered in the classroom because of your intellect. It can range from a spectrum of things, but I want you to know that I see you and I value you today, and your presence is so necessary. So thank you. So my name is Chardonnay Beaver, and I am your youth speaker for the day, among other things. I'm also a storyteller, I'm a student, I'm a Washingtonian, I'm from the Central District of Seattle, very proud of it. And I seek to bring about authenticity and to create spaces to empower people to strive to become their authentic self. And with that being said, there's a saying that I found myself rooted in and correlates with this overall event theme. Nothing good can grow if you do not nourish your own soil. And I find myself to be very hot with you, humbled, open, and transparent, that a lot of times when I speak, the messages actually end up being for me as well. It's like, it could be like you work in a field where the work that you're doing and the impact you're making is pivotal for you as well. And so I am one of the girls that I speak today. I see some familiar faces and I just want to say hello. It's so good to see you. So with that being said, I want to talk to you guys about health. Our last speaker brought up health and I was like, oh, awesome. We're on the same page. So I want to talk about health because when we talk about violence, not only is it infiltration of your rights and your privilege and luxuries of being and moving the way that you want to move, it's deemed as something that not only is it offensive, but it's traumatizing as well. So violence is a range of things, but I want to bring into conversation health. So self-care to me and self-love is mind, body, and soul. As it was mentioned, I'm 19 years old, and I found that mind, body, and soul is a great way to just think about, if I'm going to aid me, if I'm going to be fully present in this process of doing self-work, trying to undo negative thinking, trying to heal from different forms of trauma, how will I do that? And so I define mental wellness because a lot of times we talk about mental health and it's a range of things, right? But today I want to go into mental wellness, which is the incline of your mental health. Now, mental health and mental wellness is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Maybe you've been told, being brought up, that your mental health is something that can be negated or isn't a priority, but it is very much so a priority, especially in the times that we're living in with COVID and among other struggles. And so I want to tell you today that mental wellness is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Physical wellness, right? We're going to break it down. Physical wellness is a range of very variables where you can, one, participate in considering the food that you are consuming in your body, all the way down to physical activity, as well as the space you put yourself in around different people. So now we're talking about influences. And then spiritual wellness. What I want to do today is plant a seed in your life to help you nourish your own soil by giving you affirmation statements. So actually in my room, this is my room, in my room I have a bunch of I am statements, and I just like to pull them down in the morning like so. And I read them because why not seed into myself? And so I am statement that I want to give you for spiritual wellness is I am powerful. Literally reading off of these. I am passionate. I am dedicated. I am hardworking, and I am patient. And affirming yourself in your presence, possibly after experiencing any form of violence. And to be clear, I define violence as a range of things, not only physical, but emotional, verbal, spiritual, financial. And so with that being said, it is important that you are seeding back into yourself and others that you have witnessed endure struggles. Now, the importance of self-care and health in general, one, you have to prioritize yourself, especially in spaces whether you're doing advocacy or when you are actually the person you are meeting the needs of, because we do not care for self. I grew up saying and hearing all the time that I can't give you what I don't have. So if I don't have the internal love, the internal structure to then see that into someone else's life, it's not going to be there. It may be genuine and I may strive to do it, but you can't give someone what you don't have. And for that point, care looks like applying serious attention and consideration to aid various matters. That's how care can be defined. And so there's no way of doing it. And my self-care process has evolved within the last year. It looks like getting mani-pedis all the way to manifestation, right? So we talk about these dualities, and it could be, you mature and you evolve, but I had to sit down and get real because I myself have had encounters with trauma. And I think we all can say that this year alone, the state of the world has been traumatizing, but also we have instances where we are not only in spaces and dealing with people who, again, we are human, so we will be failed, but also we are in spaces where shame or guilt or overall disappointment will occur. And to that point, I want to let you know that the greatest way of serving someone else is telling your story. And that's why I started this event, letting you know that you are valuable and I see you. Because again, many times we go unseen. And so now discussing the importance of self-care and discussing what that means can aid you with greater tools and avenues to now bring it into your life. So what I want to challenge you all with is, and encourage you at the same time, to enhance your physical, spiritual, and mental wellness. I want you to take 5 minutes today, whether it be within the transition of this event, because yes, we're coming back. We will be coming back in part 2. Taking some time and writing down, how can I meet my needs? How can I meet my needs and supply to my own needs mentally, physically, and emotionally? And so that's a big part of where I'm coming from when it comes to self-care and emphasizing the practices of self-care, because to really be transparent with you and open, to be vulnerable, which I believe this space has promoted, is I grew up around some amazing women who were multifaceted, Black women, and they were strong and they were diligent, intelligent, and sophisticated. But I also saw the trauma and the struggles that they experienced as well. And when you witness anyone and know anyone, or you yourself have had to carry a load that not only society puts on you, but gender norms placed on you, circumstances placed on you, it can be very challenging. For example, I recall growing up and watching my great grandma to my aunt get up in the morning. I used to love watching these women get up and cook and provide. But at the same token, I rarely saw illicit behaviors and practices of self-care. And it goes back to my understanding that nothing good could grow if you don't nourish your own soil. And that's why I really hope, if you don't take away anything else from today, know that your mental wellness, your spiritual wellness, your physical wellness is imperative. It is not a luxury, it's a necessity, because you are worth it. If anyone doesn't tell you today, I want you to know that you are worthy, that you are important. You never know who you are by linking you to. And for other resource information, follow me and my platform, Words of Wisdom by Shar. A slide's going to be posted right up here. as they're pulling that up, I want you all to enjoy this event. They have done some great work. This is my second Justice for Girls event, and I am so proud. And having your presence here is creating solidarity that defies societal norms and unites us all for a greater cause that's beyond ourselves. So thank you so much. Here you can find my Instagram page, my YouTube, and my email if you'd like to get in contact with me. And let me know how your self-care is going, because I'm always inspired. Thank you so much and have a great day.
All right, thank you so much for your words, Sardine. You're truly inspiring, and we really, really appreciate you sharing your experience and your story with us here today. So now we'd like to pivot and give our presentation on our data collected. In this presentation, we will explore the current data landscape reported by Washington State Girls and share our considerations for how this sort of data can inform future decisions of statewide interventions, policies, and programs.
Pink 6 kicks off with a spotlight on what JFG found when pulling apart 2018 Healthy Youth Survey data by gender and race. We chose to focus here because we wanted to understand how violence, mental health, and well-being are impacting girls in the environments where they live, learn, and socialize. Often what we expect a girl to be, the soft wiring that teaches girls across all backgrounds to place a greater emphasis on and to seek approval in relationships, even when outside their best interest, is a crucial influence in her development and well-being. For that reason, we want to look more carefully and critically at how experiencing violence in this environment and in intimate relationships impacts her mental health and well-being. We focus on gender as one pivotal lens. We pulled the data apart by race and gender so we could see as many layers of identity and oppression that shape girls' social contexts. Finally, we chose a girl-centered equity lens because we know that society frequently blames girls for the harmful conditions and adversity they face due to the violence and mental health challenges they experience. We want to spark conversations that shift that narrative and ensure girls across our state gain access to opportunities and support. We want to be especially mindful of those girls living in communities disenfranchised and under-resourced by systemic racism, and those facing housing instability and/or involvement in the child welfare or juvenile justice systems. The COVID-19 pandemic has magnified this crisis and is widening the gap between the marginalized and the privileged. It is exacerbating the ways violence, mental health, and economic instability impact Washington State girls in the ways that I will tell you about next. So at the beginning of 2020, Justice for Girls started the process of compiling data on the status of girls in Washington, particularly as it related to race and ethnicity. We wanted to know to what extent girls, and particularly girls of color, were experiencing violence and sexual violence. Violence and sexual violence, depression, anxiety, and other barriers to well-being. We compiled a fact sheet, which will be accessible in the chat box, based on data collected in the 2018 Washington Healthy Youth Survey. All the data we present here and in the next two slides was compiled from 2018 Washington Healthy Youth Survey reports. The findings are for Washington State residing female identified students in grades 8, 10, and 12. In 2018, the Healthy Youth Survey was completed by 234,610 students in all 39 counties, in 238 school districts, and in 970 schools. Of the students surveyed, nearly 11,000 students identified as female for grades 8, 10, and 12 statewide. Let me now sum up some of what we learned from this survey. So pre-COVID, we know that girls across all racial groups in Washington State are more likely than boys to experience at-home emotional abuse, anxiety and depressive feelings, attempt suicide, feel unsafe by a person they're dating, be bullied at school, be harassed on social media, and receive sexually suggestive images on social media. We also see that not all girls experience these impacts in their communities the same way. Girls of color report negative impacts more than white girls in every one of these indicators, apart from experiencing higher levels of anxiety. So this data really stuck out to me personally because I was pretty surprised to see girls across the board are more likely to experience anxiety and depression, as well as bullying and harassment, and also that this was especially true for girls of color. I felt like that resonated with me personally because I've struggled with anxiety and self-esteem issues about my own appearance and my own social interactions, a lot of times because of gendered and racialized messaging that girls are given, that our worth comes from our appearance, or that we are expected to have this Eurocentric standard of beauty. So this data really resonated with me to see that this is a trend across Washington State youth. So now I'm going to pass it off to Haley, who's going to share about the data on safety and violence.
We found that as Washington State girls get older across all racial groups, they witness the same or more violence, and their level of hope tends to decline. Across all racial groups, the number of people and adults who can help decreases for girls in the 12th grade. Taking a closer look, the chart paints kind of a distressing picture of the extent to which these girls feel unsafe in their relationships and in the places they're expected to live and learn. For example, 1 in 4 girls feel unsafe at school. This is especially true for Black and Native American girls. Overall, nearly twice as many girls of color compared to white girls say that they miss school as a result of feeling unsafe. 1 in 3 girls also experience at-home emotional abuse, such as being sworn at, insulted, or humiliated by an adult at home. This is especially true for nearly half of all multiracial girls. Lastly, 1 in 4 girls are made to feel unsafe by the person that they're dating. This is especially true for nearly 1 in 3 of all girls of color, and by the 12th grade, nearly 1 in 3 of white and Hispanic/Latina girls, and 1 in 2 of American Indian/Alaskan Native girls are forced into sexual situations. What stood out for me personally was how many girls were made to feel uncomfortable or unsafe in spaces that are meant to prioritize safety and comfort. So typically, we might expect our homes and our schools to be environments where people feel protected, but this data kind of highlights how this isn't always the case for a lot of youth, especially for Black and brown girls. The data here shows us the mental health and well-being impacts that girls are experiencing, as many don't have access to support or help. Almost 3 out of 4 girls experience high levels of anxiety. This is especially true for nearly 4 out of 5 white and multiracial girls. We know that when girls can talk to adults, they are less likely to report experiencing depressive feelings. In fact, about 6 out of 8 girls who say that they can have an adult that they can report to say that they experience no depressive feelings. However, only about 1 in 3 girls say that they know people in their neighborhood or their school that would provide help if they needed it. Girls of color are even less likely to have supportive adults at school and in their neighborhoods in comparison to white girls. Lastly, 1 out of 2 girls who experience at-home abuse say they have feelings of no hope. This slide really resonated with me because similar to Jay, I've also struggled with anxiety for a few years, and I know that sometimes my own personal symptoms or episodes can worsen if I don't have a support system or some individual that I can express my feelings or worries to. And I think that this data really shows the importance of establishing healthy relationships and how this can have a really big impact on a young person's mental health. And now I'm going to pass it off to Amara.
All right, so from our state and national partners, we are learning about the ways that the COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating the ways violence, mental health, economic instability impact girls all across Washington State, particularly those living in communities disenfranchised and under-resourced by systemic racism, and those facing housing instability and/or involvement in the child welfare or juvenile justice system. Under stay-at-home orders and teaching youth development going online, girls with fewer avenues for support and interaction are facing things like greater levels of anxiety, mental health challenges, gender-rooted expectations for household chores and childcare, potentially elevated levels of abuse, academic slides, because there's a lack of academic support to learning styles and few opportunities for youth development that promote equity, digital divides that hamper access to services, resources, and education, as well as increased social media harassment and cyberbullying due to greater time spent online. That is a lot to absorb, so I'm going to take a deep breath. If y'all would like to join me, I'll be doing that right now. So, oh, wow. So this is really heavy, and honestly, a lot of things stood out to me about this. Personally, I have felt these greater levels of anxiety and mental health challenges, just as Jay and Haley had told y'all about as well. I thought that COVID would give me a time to just, focus on myself, since I'll have all this time to myself anyways. But I know that led me to overthinking a lot of things, and also it felt really lonely, just sitting in my room 7 days a week without really interaction or face-to-face interaction. Additionally, I do have a younger sister, so I really see those like gendered expectations for household chores and childcare. Like I really see that, because I mean, on a regular day, I'd be able to hang out with my friends after school, but now I have to watch my sister and be a little more responsible for other people in my house, especially as we're being more conscientious of everyone's health as well. So next slide, please. So based on this data, our coalition is working on a set of policy and program recommendations to ameliorate or take off some of the burden being felt by girls across Washington state. On the screen is a growing list of recommendations that center girls' needs from our national partners. As presented, shifts we can take include creating better systems for documenting and quantifying funding losses to girl-serving agencies and nonprofits, expanding access to mental health services online and making telehealth more accessible to gender-expansive youth of color, making plans for identifying and serving individuals at risk for violence with reduced in-person contact. An example of this could be students' access to online tools to self-report at-home violence and responding to domestic violence at home as well. We can also expand digital access to school supplies like tablets, computers, internet, and other school resources that are necessary to succeed in our online schooling now, as well as develop better processes for giving direct payments to girls and families. And lastly, creating guides for effective girl-centered approaches and practices as organizations move to online platforms and services. This could look like addressing developmental needs, bias, and microaggressions within these guides. I'm going to pass it back to Jay.
Great. So today we want to invite you all to think about your reactions to what we've presented as we consider ways to address and prevent the violence and mental health impacts we're seeing and experiencing as girls. Also, if there are any questions about the data, please feel free to use the chat box. And for more specific inquiries, as well as information on our collection methodology, please feel free to reach out to Tristan. She'll put her email in the chat box as well. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so Tristan just put her email in the chat box. But before we move on, we would like to take a minute to gauge your initial reaction to this data presentation. So Tristan will launch a poll now, and please select as many that apply to you. We know there are a lot of things that are talked about, so a lot of mixed emotions can come up, and that's perfectly okay. So it seems like people are not surprised, sad, motivated to act. We're seeing a lot of that. Yeah, those are the top three right now. We have some people who are surprised, folks that are hopeful, also feelings of anxiety. All right. Yeah, so it's looking like most people were motivated to act and not surprised. So I think that's really telling of how we can even see these impacts on girls across Washington state. But I'm glad that we have a room full of people who are willing to act and motivated. So that's always a great way. Yeah, so we are also interested in hearing your feedback about our policy recommendations, as I read on the last slides. So please take a moment to type in the chat box your thoughts about how these policy ideas might work in your community. We would also love to hear about initiatives or policies that are already in place in your community that are successful in centering the needs of girls and/or promoting racial equity. All right, so feel free to type in the chat box. Let's see. Yeah, again, so if there are any policies in your community that are already in play, please share it with us. We would love to hear about it. Or if you have any reactions to the policy recommendations, I believe the slide looks like it's still up. We would love to hear that too. And if not right now, or if we're having a little trouble thinking about specific ones, we would love to hear you all share them throughout the entire event as thoughts come to you. I know I've kind of put you all on the spot, but if you think of something a little later, please share it with us. We would love to hear it. Yeah, and we are saving these chats, and Tristan will email you a post-conference follow-up as well. So again, we appreciate your feedback. Thank you for sharing earlier about your feelings about this presentation. And we really appreciate your guidance as we move forward with our policy agenda in 2021. Oh, look, it looks like in the chat we have some people saying, I think school resources would make a great impact. I agree. She likes the ideas of guides for effective girl-centered approaches, also amazing. And creative guides for effective, yes, emphasize that effective part. Because we can create all the guides we want in the world, but if they're not serving the people who it's meant to serve, then what's the point of it, I like that. Well, thank you all for sharing. All right, and now I will pass it back to Haley.
All right, I now have the great honor of introducing today's keynote speaker, Ms. Cherise Hopkins. Cherise is an attorney at Rights for Girls, a human rights organization that's committed to ending gender-based violence in the US, where she engages in work in advocacy that enhance the safety and well-being of young women and girls who have been pushed to the margins of our society, particularly young women and girls of color, and helps to improve responses to those who have experienced violence. Her work includes policy reform, public education and awareness, training and technical assistance, research, and coalition building. Cherise is the co-author of 3 innovative reports as well: Girls and Gender Expansive Youth and COVID-19, Survivor Protection, Reducing the Risk of Trauma to Child Sex Trafficking Victims, and Beyond the Walls, a look at girls in DC's juvenile justice system. Cherise is also the member of the faculty of the stumbled on my words, faculty of the National Judicial Institute of Domestic Child Sex Trafficking, and she co-manages the Girls at the Margin National Alliance. Her prior experience includes the provision of consultation services to nonprofits and small businesses founded by women and people of color in the areas of analysis, research, and strategic planning. Prior to her work for Rights for Girls, Cherise practiced employment law at Target and Foley and Lardner LLP, where her practice included advising employers on the equitable treatment of employees and maintaining harassment-free workplace. Cherise received an MBA from Columbia College, a JD from Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, and is a member of the Wisconsin State Bar. So please join me in welcoming Miss Cherise Hopkins.
Her name is Jasmine. Jasmine grew up in poverty, but the family always seemed to have just enough to get by. Her parents always managed to make sure she had a roof over her head and food in her belly. She had one younger sister, and the 2 of them were daddy's girls. Her father didn't have much money, but he spoiled the girls as much as he could. At age 7, her father went to prison. At age 8, Jasmine's mother married her stepfather. He seemed like a nice man at first. He had a good job and made sure the family was provided for. At age 9, her stepfather lost his job and began drinking all the time. When he was drunk, he would beat her mother. At age 11, her stepfather began raping her. He threatened to kill her if she told anyone. She knew that when he came home drunk, she would either be beaten or sexually abused. Jasmine was always afraid that he would begin abusing her little sister, if she tried to stop him from abusing her. Jasmine used to be a good student, but after the sexual abuse, she struggled to focus in class. Her grades began to drop. At age 12, she got tired of the abuse and ran away from home. She was arrested, but then released and told by the judge to stay home. When Jasmine returned home, the violence increased. Her stepfather began brutally beating her mother, and Jasmine hit him in order to protect her. The police were called, and Jasmine was arrested again. At age 13, Jasmine began drinking and doing drugs in order to cope with the abuse. She decided that she would rather drink than have to go to school. She became truant and was arrested again. Even though Jasmine never hurt anyone, she was put in a juvenile detention facility for her constant running away and truancy and substance abuse. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. As Haley said, my name is Sharice, and I'm an attorney at Rights for Girls. And a key part of our work at Rights for Girls is working to ensure that survivors of violence are not criminalized for their experiences of abuse and trauma, survivors like Jasmine. And so I think this conference is so incredibly important, and I am so honored to have been invited to share at the Beyond Pink conference. And I just want to start by saying thank you to the Justice for Girls Coalition for having me here. And I want to say thank you to everyone involved with the Beyond Pink conference for your incredible work. This has been amazing so far. And so just thank you for your work. And again, thank you for having me. And of course, thank you to all of you online for taking your time to enjoy in this conversation, which I think is so incredibly important. Not just the, because of the topic, but I think the timing, right? As was shared earlier when we were talking about the survey and what's been happening with COVID, and rates of violence against girls has increased since the pandemic began. It was already alarming before, and it's increased since the pandemic began. And this is across the spectrum of violence. It includes, for example, domestic child sex trafficking. And not only has violence against girls increased, but it's become more aggressive. And then at the same time, as was mentioned earlier, this year, we've seen increasing outcry from communities of color who are asking that who are shedding a light on the fact that people of color are also being harmed because of race, and are shedding a light that, sometimes systems and structures overlook the needs of people of color, or sometimes even perpetuate the harm. And so it's really important, and I'm so appreciative that we're engaging in these conversations, but it's also important that as we engage in these conversations that we're really mindful of this call to reimagine what safety and justice looks like, and that we reimagine what safety and justice looks like for girls of color who are having unique experiences at these intersections of violence and criminalization. So I mentioned intersections real quickly, and so if you could drop in the chat for me, I'm really curious and would like to see how many of you are familiar with the term intersectionality. So again, if you could just drop in the chat real quickly if you are familiar with the term intersectionality. Great. Awesome. I'm seeing some yeses. Well, thank you for all of you who are participating in the chat and responding to my question. And I'm really excited and encouraged to see that some of you have heard of the term intersectionality. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term intersectionality, it was coined in the 90s by the incredible Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a professor, a lawyer, an advocate. She wears many hats. And she coined this term to really speak to the ways that people are oppressed because of their different social identities. Social identities being a person's race, a person's gender, a person's sexual orientation, their ethnicity. And so what I really appreciate about the way Professor Crenshaw speaks to intersectionality is that she says it's not some grand theory, but it's really a prism through which we can view problems. It's a way, putting on these lens, viewing the problems, through this lens of race, through this lens of gender. And one of the problems that it's really important that I apply this sense of intersectionality to is the problem of violence. And so And actually it was intersectionality that brought me to this work. I have the privilege of being in community with a lot of great people, including women of color who experience violence. And a lot of them, they experienced violence in their childhoods, but their particular needs were not met. I know we talked about sharing stories, their stories often weren't uplifted. So I really wanted to specifically get involved on how I could address the issue of violence against women and girls of color. And I actually had people push back against me. People told me that I had to choose between gender equity and racial justice. So even in these conversations that I was having, trying to have conversations about the safety and well-being of girls of color, in the midst of those very conversations, girls of color were being erased. And so again, intersectionality is so important because it's only when we intentionally look at race and intentionally look at gender, that we can maybe try to understand, how girls of color are experiencing violence and why, what do girls of color need to be safe and to thrive, and how can we as adults, as allies, mobilize to ensure that those needs are met. And so it's in applying an intersectional lens that we see that critical to preventing and eliminating violence against girls is understanding and dismantling the abuse to prison pipeline. So for example, I wonder if any of you would be surprised by the fact that girls are amongst young people who are impacted by our legal system, girls are 4 times more likely than boys to report experiences of sexual abuse. That's 4 times more likely, and that's prior to their involvement in the legal system. And girls of color are disproportionately impacted by the legal system. 62% of girls who are incarcerated are girls of color, yet girls of color are just 24% of the youth population. Take, for example, Letitia Clay. And if you'll just give me a second while I share my slides with you. Letitia Clay, at the age of 15, took her child and left an unsafe home environment, and she moved in with a man and a woman. But these men and women, unfortunately, did not turn out to be a safe place. They started exploiting Letitia for sex. They convinced her to advertise herself for sex on a website. They explicitly advertised sex with a teenager, and 2 men responded. These 2 adult men showed up at the hotel intending to pay to have sex with 15-year-old Letitia, but Letitia's exploiters robbed them at gunpoint instead. Letitia was not involved in this robbery, yet Letitia was charged as an adult with armed robbery, and she was sentenced to 9 years in an adult prison. Now, thankfully, Letitia was able to successfully appeal, but she was only released from prison after having spent nearly a year, again, in an adult prison. What must that have been like for Letitia? What must that have been like for her child? Meanwhile, the 2 men who were going to pay to rape Letitia, charges weren't filed against them. So we had a situation where Letitia was the only child. We have a situation where Letitia was the one who's experiencing abuse. And we have a situation where the only reason that any of these 5 people were at the hotel was because they were planning to exploit Letitia. The only 2 people, or the only people who were viewed as victims in this situation, were the 2 men who were going to pay to rape her. And sadly, what we see is that this is not uncommon, particularly for girls of color. Girls of color are often not seen as survivors, but are instead criminalized. And so to understand how this happens, I think it's important that we start at the beginning, which is actually girls' well-being. And so I really think, I appreciate you all for hanging in here. And I should have said this before, as you can see, we're going to be discussing some healthy things. And so I know it was said before, but please, if you need to take a break at any point, please remember your self-care. It's very important. And I think part of that self-care is remembering, and not just self-care, but respect for girls is also remembering, that girls are more than the trauma. And so that's why I said, in terms of the abuse to prison pipeline, really the beginning is girls' well-being, right? It's not automatic that girls will experience violence. It's because of societal factors and things that as a society we become accustomed to or have allowed to happen. But girls, again, they're more than their trauma. Girls have, I invite you to think about a girl that what does she like to do? What do you admire about her? For me, I think of my two nieces who give me so much joy. They want to be warrior princesses and Power Rangers, and they remix their nursery rhyme songs. And so what we have is that girls, are so many incredible things, smart and funny and make great contributions to our communities. But what happens is these external factors come in, right, and interfere with their well-being. These external factors come in and create barriers to their being able to enjoy what they were previously enjoying, create barriers to their continuing to attain their dreams or even explore their dreams. And one of those external factors is violence. And girls, as was said before, girls experience staggering rates of violence in our country. One of our girls will experience sexual violence before the age of 18. That's just sexual violence, y'all. And I'd ask you, if you will take a moment and drop in the chat, what are some forms of violence that girls might experience? Again, if you'll just drop in the chat real quickly, some forms of violence that, to your knowledge, girls might experience in our country or even in our communities. Physical violence, absolutely. Physical abuse, yes. Verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. Thank you all for sharing that. Phobia, I see. Yes, there's so many forms of violence. I actually remember being at a presentation before, and we spent 20 minutes just naming these things. It's so important to name them. So thank you all for naming and calling a light on this problem and these issues of violence. There's also domestic child sex trafficking, child violence by systems, yes. Girls might experience rape and other forms of sexual assault. I think before it was mentioned teen dating violence. So there's all these forms of violence that girls might experience, and this violence is impacting girls of color too. In fact, there are some forms of violence that disproportionately impact girls of color, domestic child sex trafficking being one of them, which disproportionately impacts Black and Native girls in particular. I know that a lot of you are in King County, Washington, or are in Washington, so you live and work in Washington. And so I wanted to be sure to share some information from Washington. And so this information comes out of King County, where they're doing a lot of great work to address child sex trafficking. And part of that great work is getting the information and disaggregating that information by race and by gender, so they can have an understanding of who's being impacted. And what they found was that in King County, girls are 84% of trafficking survivors. Black children are 52% of trafficking survivors. So again, Black girls disproportionately being impacted, yet Black girls are just 1% of the general population. That's a huge disparity. And then they've also, I appreciate, they looked to see that who was perpetuating this harm. And they saw that 80% of sex buyers are white men. And so again, thinking intersectionality, it's important that we gather information and that we disaggregate it, or, and by disaggregate, I mean being able to really dig down into it, so we can look specifically and see, oh, Black girls are being impacted, Native girls, Latinx girls are being impacted. And when we do, let's think back to Letitia, right? When we look at these numbers and, seeing that not just these disparities in terms of who's being trafficked, but then also how might the fact that it is predominantly white men who are buying girls of color for sex, how might that play into the power dynamics? How might that contribute to the fact that young girls like Letitia are the ones who are being criminalized and not being viewed as survivors? And so what we see is that obviously when someone experiences trauma, there's going to cause physical harm to the body. But what we also know is that it also causes emotional harm. And I so appreciate Chardonnay and her uplifting the importance of mental health and well-being, because that's so important, especially as we talk about violence, and especially when we're talking about young people. In the 90s, there was a study on adverse childhood experiences, also called ACEs. And adverse childhood experiences are stressors or traumatic events that occur in childhood, so before the age of 18. They're things like abuse like Jasmine experienced, some of the other things you mentioned, like emotional neglect. And what was found, I should mention Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who's currently the California Surgeon General. But prior to that role, she did a lot of great work around ACEs and seeing how they impact children. And what was found was that ACEs can impact physical health, including brain development, can impact a young person's hormonal systems, immune systems, and even a young person's DNA. Experiencing these experiences, these traumatic experiences, can lead to learning difficulties. They can lead to behavioral problems. And that's a lot to deal with. That's a lot for anyone to deal with. But how might, right, if you're still growing, if you're young, if you're still developing, how much more is that going to impact you? And so what we see then is that, girls are left with, after experiencing violence, left with a lot to heal from. But what happens if they don't have the resources and the services and the supports to aid them in that healing? What happens when they don't have, if they have access to some services or supports, but they don't have their specific needs as a girl of color in mind? What happens if they aren't, for example, gender responsive or culturally responsive? Then girls are left in situations where they're having to cope on their own. And I use that word cope specifically. Someone was pointing out the other day in a conversation that I had how healing and coping are different. Healing's about wellness, but coping tends to be a survival strategy. So girls are really left without supports of not only on their own, but they're often left in a place of just trying to survive. And oftentimes these methods can be unhealthy. Girls may engage in self-harm. They may turn to substance dependency as a form of self-medication and trying to numb pain. They might have, I think this was talked about before, difficulty finding safe and positive adults, which can lead to not following instructions, not following rules, because why would you follow the rules or listen to someone that you don't trust, right? Like, we as adults don't do that. It can lead to avoidance behaviors like running away. When we think back to Jasmine and how she ran away from home because of all the abuse taking place in the home. And can it also lead to other behaviors? For example, becoming maybe hypervigilant and being concerned about safety. And so maybe pushing or hitting, but not because she's violent, but because she's just trying to survive and care for herself. And all of these behaviors have been labeled as criminal. And so what we see, and I apologize, I think that this graphic may be a little smaller than I intended, but in the PDS, hopefully you'll be able to see it better. But what we see is that essentially girls are being criminalized for their lack of coping skills. They're being arrested for their lack of coping skills, which is our collective failure as a society, right? It's not on girls. And what happens is they are then pushed into a legal system where they are highly likely to experience more trauma. And then when they come out of the system, then they have even more trauma, and so they're likely to engage again in those behaviors I mentioned, and then get rearrested. And without intervention and support, it can create this vicious cycle that you see on your screen, including into adulthood. And this trajectory is all too common for girls. Currently, across the country, 73% of girls who are in the legal system have a history of sexual or physical abuse. 73%. And in fact, that is child sexual abuse is actually a predictor of justice system involvement for girls. And so that is sadly the abuse to prison pipeline. Rights for Girls and Georgetown and the Miss Foundation, we came up with this term in 2015, and it was part of when we were writing our report, the Sexual Abuse to Prison Pipeline, the Girls Building. And we wrote this report really with the specific intent of identifying and bringing light to the fact that girls are also impacted by the legal system. But for girls, their pathways into the system, they differ than boys, and they're so often rooted in their experiences of violence and trauma. And it's girls of color who are bearing the brunt of this injustice. And so I mentioned pathways. And so pathways, that by which girls are pushed in the system after experiencing violence. There are four primary ones that I want to mention. So they're disproportionate criminalization for status offenses. They're crossing over from the child welfare system into the legal system. Girls are criminalized for their experiences of child sex trafficking. And they're also criminalized for experiencing violence in the home. And so I want to briefly tell you a little bit about each of these pathways. So in regards to criminalization for status offenses are those behaviors that are only legal for someone under the age of 18. They're behaviors like running away from home, staying out past curfew, missing school. And these behaviors are often responses to trauma. When we look at the experience of girls who are and think about these behaviors, then what we see is that they that they're signs of vulnerability, that these behaviors are not, they don't pose danger to anyone else. They aren't public safety concerns, but yet girls can still be arrested for them. Along those lines, children who are impacted by the child welfare system are often children who are experiencing some form of vulnerability. They may have experienced abuse. They may have experienced neglect. They may be disconnected from their families. But what we see is that too often, because of their circumstances of connection to the child welfare system, there's probably some trauma that has occurred. And so if girls are not, they may engage in behaviors because of the trauma, the behaviors that we talked about before. And people don't have an understanding of how trauma manifests in girls. They might look and view those behaviors as, or the girls as problematic, as troublesome, as not listening, as misbehaving. And so what we see is that if families charged with their care, if other people who are there intended to be support, if they don't have an understanding of how trauma manifests in girls, if they are not equipped with the tools to de-escalate situations and provide a trauma-informed response, then it can be similar to what happens with school push-out, which is that a law enforcement is relied upon to address concerns about behavior. I should also mention that children in the child welfare system, particularly in foster care, are at increased risk of being trafficked for sex. And which leads me to the next pathway, which is child sex trafficking, which can also cause girls to be involved with the legal system. And for those of you who aren't familiar with child sex trafficking, under the federal law, laws can vary from state to state, but under the federal law, anyone under the age of 18 who exchanges sex for anything of value, so that's even food, that's clothing, that's shelter, that young person is a survivor of sex trafficking. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that young people can't legally consent to sex. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that sex trafficking is a form of violence and abuse. Yet there are still places where girls are routinely arrested on prostitution charges. And then also, even when, and I should say the girls of color are again bearing the brunt of that. But then there's also other situations, other charges that girls are arrested for that stem directly from their experiences of exploitation. Again, it could be running away because of being groomed from a trafficker. It could be missing school because they are being trafficked. It could be theft because child sex trafficking survivors are viewed as a means of making money. And so maybe their traffickers require them to steal to bring in more income. And then the last one that I want to mention is conflict in the home, which really is an unintended consequence of pro-mandatory arrest laws that were created in the 90s. And so these laws were meant to address adult intimate partner violence situations, to make sure that the person causing the harm was being held accountable. But sadly, how it's played out is too often those who are experiencing the harm are the ones who are being held accountable. And it's even extended beyond that to family violence situations. So you have increasing situations where girls are being arrested on simple assault charges, which I should say, because I know that word assault, like it makes you think, or may make you think violent, but often these charges are misdemeanors and viewed as non-violent charges, like non-violent behavior. And girls are still being arrested though, even though they aren't the ones who primarily hold the power in the home, even though they might be trying to protect themselves or someone they care about from abuse. Again, think back to Jasmine, who's trying to protect her mother from her stepfather. She got arrested. And I should also say, oftentimes, these situations, there's no injury or there's a minor injury, but still girls are being arrested. And so once girls are arrested and they're in the system, they can still experience even more trauma, which I think I mentioned. So if we think about the fact that interpersonal violence is often about these dynamics of power and control, how might that impact, how might the system unintentionally replicate those dynamics? You have young people or girls who are being shackled, so they're literally physically being restrained. They are subject to searches, possibly even strip searches. They're being confined to their room. So, we talked about in COVID and even being in your own home, how isolating it can be to be in the same space for a prolonged amount of time. And then there's just also the fact that, having people in authority over them who are directing what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, when they can or can't do things. And all of this can exacerbate trauma. I want to share about a young woman by the name of Kiana Aldridge. And Kiana is a survivor of abuse. She's a survivor of the Abuse to Prison Pipeline. And she thankfully was released from prison a couple of weeks ago, but it was after 8 years. She was initially incarcerated when she was 17. And incarceration was tough for her. She was sexually abused during her incarceration. She had to deal with had concerns of retaliation for reporting her abuse. She had concerns about getting COVID. She had to deal with room isolation, depression, and she actually tried to harm herself multiple times. So thankfully she is out now, but I just wanted to uplift her story because I think it's so important to see that the harms that young people experience when they're incarcerated, they're very real. So again, thankfully she's out, and hopefully that means that she is going to be able to get the help that she needs to heal. And I want to be sure to mention that the hope that girls, the help that girls need upon being released from the system is not just in terms of coping with or healing, I should say, from trauma that occurred prior to legal system involvement. It's not just in terms of healing from trauma that occurred in the system, but there's also barriers that are waiting for girls once they come out. Girls, there's still a lot of stigma associated with being arrested or having a record. Girls who have records, they have these barriers. It's harder for them to get jobs, to get an education. It's even harder to get access to housing. And all these things are crucial for safety. And I think it's also really important that I mention that criminalizing girls, reinforcing the narratives that they're being told by the people who abuse them. Narratives like, I'm the one. This is what love looks like. I'm the one who cares about you. They don't care about you, or people won't believe you. All these harmful narratives, when we criminalize girls, we're reinforcing that. And again, I want to bring us back to the point that this trajectory I mentioned, this is pushing girls into the legal system because they've experienced violence, it disproportionately impacts girls of color. Native girls are more than 4 times likely to be confined to detention than white girls. Black girls are 3.5 times more likely to be detained than white girls. And Latinx girls are 38% more likely to be detained than white girls. And I'm talking about detention, but I want to mention that these disparities, this increased impact on girls of color occurs almost at every stage of the process, including decisions about who are the police going to be called on, who's even going to be referred to the legal system to begin with. And so what we see is that girls of color, they just often aren't viewed as survivors. Again, I know I've said it before, but I think it's important to repeat it because it's the reality of what a lot of girls of color who've experienced violence, or it's the reality of their experience, I should say. And so I think it's important just how We can't ignore, right, that girls are disproportionately impacted by interpersonal violence. We can't ignore that people of color are disproportionately impacted by criminalization. Then likewise, we can't ignore that girls of color are disproportionately impacted by the abuse to prison pipeline. And so I want to talk some about how this is. And I think it was touched on earlier about the fact that there are a lot of harmful narratives about girls of country in our communities. And these narratives, some of them stem all the way back to colonization and slavery. And we look at how colonization and slavery and these other traumatic events in our past, how they operated. They use language to dehumanize people. And we see that reflected in the way that girls of color are often talked about today. Girls of color are often deemed to be loud and aggressive. Girls of color are often hypersexualized and portrayed as being overtly sexual. I mean, just turn on your TV program, wherever there's a girl of color, and she's probably being hypersexualized and portrayed in a way that would make you think that she's actually 2 years older than she actually is. And so, and along those lines, especially for Black children, girls are viewed as being more mature. Black kids in particular often deny the presumption of innocence that tends to come with childhood. This actually happens so much that there's a name for it. It's called adultification. And I wonder if you'll just drop an A in the chat if any of you have heard of adultification before. Great, I'm so glad to see, yes, that's wonderful. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, just to give some context, Georgetown came out with a report a couple of years ago where they asked people to how did they view Black girls compared to how did they view white girls. And starting as young as age 5, Black girls are viewed as less in need of protection, less in need of nurturing, less in need of comfort, but more knowledgeable about adult topics, including sex. And so I think this is very illuminating, right? Because on the one hand, it's of course horrifying that girls of color are being arrested for their experiences of violence. But then when we think about the fact that 5-year-old little Black girls are being viewed as sex-informed adults, then it's not surprising that 12-year-old Jasmine, 15-year-old Leticia, 17-year-old Kiana were not viewed as survivors, were not viewed as children needed support, but were viewed as adults making bad choices and were criminalized. I think it's also important to just mention the fact that these narratives also contribute to not just marginalization, but the needs of girls of color being overlooked or not prioritized, I should say. For example, when we think back to when the Me Too movement went viral a few years ago, and I say went viral because it was already in existence, but then when Alyssa Milano tweeted Me Too, it became on a lot more people's radar. And so even though it really picked up momentum, very little focus of Me Too was on girls of color. I should say the viral movement, very little focus of the viral movement was on girls of color, even though girls of color experience alarming rates of violence, and even though the incredible Tarana Burke, who started the movement years prior to it going viral, did so because she was concerned that girls of color were not getting the protection and the support and safety that they deserve. And I think it's also, again, looking at this with an intersectional lens, it's important to remember that not only are girls of color experiencing marginalization due to their race, but they're girls. So they're also having to contend with the same rape culture that other girls and other women or adult women are having to face. So I know that was a lot. And some of you may be thinking like, this is a problem and it is very sad, but what does it have to do with violence prevention? And my response is this. I ask that you think back to Jasmine, who ran away from home because she was being abused and she got arrested. Think of how she tried to protect her mother, or she hit her stepfather in an effort to protect her mother, who was being abused, and Jasmine got arrested. Think of the fact that she missed school because she had so much trauma she was trying to cope with, and she got arrested. Think of Leticia, who there were people who tried to sell her for sex, to people who wanted to buy her for sex, and she got arrested. Meanwhile, What happened to Jasmine's stepfather? What happened to the two men who tried to rape Letitia? Nothing. And so I think we have to consider, how do we protect girls from violence if there are girls who still aren't viewed as children in need of and deserving of protection? How do we prevent violence against girls if we don't acknowledge and address the fact that the behaviors that we sometimes see are in response to their experiences of violence? And how do we stop people from harming girls or hold them accountable when they harm girls if we are still holding girls accountable for their own victimization? And so I think it comes down to the fact that we want girls to be free, right? Free from violence inside and out the home. We want girls to be free from fear. We want them, as part of freedom, to be able to make choices, to make mistakes, to dream. But we want this for all girls. And so, as you can see, for girls of color, for girls of color to have freedom, they have to be free from unjust criminalization. So what can we do? I wanted to share just a few suggestions, and these suggestions are really geared towards, since we're talking about intersectionality, of how can we apply this intersectional framework in our work. And so my suggestions are shifting the narrative, which I know was said earlier, adopting a continuous learning mindset, applying strength-based approaches, listening to girls, of course, and then assessing policies and practices with both a racial and gender lens. So in regards to shifting the narrative, at Rights for Girls, we have a saying of how we're named is how we're treated. So for example, if we are calling Black and brown girls or teens women, then they're going to be viewed and treated as adults. If we call child sex trafficking survivors child prostitutes, then we are going to treat them as people making poor choices and not respond to them as children who are being exploited. And so it's really important, that with our children, in our communities, in our organizations, just across the board, that we really have conversations to push back against those myths and those harmful narratives about girls of color, that we uplift, who they truly are, and that as part of this uplifting, it's important that we also talk about their experiences. I think it was Chardonnay who said, we need to be able to tell our stories. We need to, so speaking about the experiences of girls of color, but also speaking about girls of color's needs. And I also want to say that it's really important that men and boys be included in these conversations, because if we don't, right, if we have conversations and it's just women, it's just girls, then we're going to be perpetuating this cycle of girls continuing to have to be responsible for their own safety. And so along these lines of engaging in conversation, I think it's also important that we be very mindful of how are we coming to these conversations. And so at first, I want to say that I know that all of you are doing incredible work and carry a great amount of expertise. So please feel and hear my sincerity when I say that this is not to downplay the expertise and the knowledge that you have, but it's more to uplift the fact that there are so many things that impact the lives of girls of color. Some things good, some things bad. Some of them we've mentioned, intersectionality, historical trauma. There's, culture, the different cultures that girls come from. And so we don't know about these things unless we intentionally seek them out. And when I say we, it's again, it's a sincere we. For example, I used to talk about the abuse to prison pipeline, and I used to just say the beginning was violence, and not really address girls' well-being. And it was through engaging in conversations and having to assess my own language. So I was like, how dare I? I am reducing girls to their trauma in these particular settings, even though that's not where my heart is. But I had to, again, step back and assess my own language and how am I engaging. So when I say we, I know someone said earlier, speaking from I statement. So that it's an I statement for me, because and I think all of us have learning and also unlearning to do. And so just to give some recommendations, there's so many great readings and documentaries and resources and conversations taking place, but just some things I wanted to share because sometimes I am asked what I've read or what I'm reading. And so of course I want to invite you all to check out Rights for Girls resources page. That sexual abuse to prison pipeline report I mentioned is on there. And also on there we have other materials that speak directly to these intersections of race and gender and violence and criminalization. You've probably heard of Dr. Monique Morris's book Push Out, but definitely wanted to mention that. At the Dark End of the Street is a really powerful book that speaks to the history of racialized violence in the US. Stephanie Covington has written quite a few things, articles and books that speak to recognizing how trauma manifests in girls, as well as how we can respond specifically to girls, right? Not having a gender neutral approach, because again, in some ways, girls and boys are different. And then Girls Leadership recently released a really awesome report called Ready to Lead, which brings me to my third suggestion, which is the importance of strengths-based approaches. Again, I know we talked about before, but girls are more than their trauma. They're more than their experiences of marginalization. And so speaking of that Ready to Lead report, it has so much great information in there, but including some of the great information that about girls' confidence, and Black and Latinx girls were found to be have higher levels of confidence, more likely to view themselves as leaders, and they also viewed leadership skills as being really important to their being able to attain the goals that they have for themselves. So it's really important, as we think about supporting girls, not just having this mindset that only focuses on harm, but again, going back to the full humanity of girls, and how can we equip girls with leadership skills? How can we help them identify what their gifts are and their skills are, and how can we help them hone them? And also, how can we help girls have a seat at the table? Which brings me to my next point, which is the importance of listening to girls. Girls are the experts of their experiences, and they're the experts of their experiences. And so it's just so important, that we engage in community with girls, that we build trusted relationships with girls. I just keep thinking to the fact of the data that was shared earlier about young people in Washington, and how a lot of girls felt that they did not have people to support them, that they could go to. So I think being sure to create that space to develop trusted relationships, so that girls can come to us not just with their lows, but with their highs too. When they share those highs, when they share those aspirations, really leaning into encouraging and seeing how we can support them. But at the same time, if they come to us with their lows, supporting those too. And also being realistic that sometimes girls may not come to us when they're having a hard time. Sometimes it's going to be about us to be on the lookout. And when we do, looking with that lens of getting beyond the behavior. And then I also want to say, now we talked earlier about creating space for girls to share their stories, but also I just want to also emphasize the importance of creating space for girls to share in other ways that don't involve their story. So for example, girls have great recommendations and solutions on thoughts on how to solve problems, excuse me, or even how to prevent problems. So I think it's really providing space for girls' leadership and girls' voices in a spectrum of ways. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was applying a race and gender lens. I think this is so important for our programs, our practices, our policies. It's just being very intentional to look beyond intent to what is the impact that's taking place. It's been shown that the only way that racial disparities are addressed, that gender disparities are addressed, that we move the needle towards racial justice and gender equity is if we intentionally look at race and if we intentionally look at gender. And so I just have a few questions here. There's so many different questions you can ask and ways to analyze, but just gave a few suggestions. For example, does a policy or practice make assumption about girls of color or their families or their communities? Again, going back to those narratives. Going back to the narratives. Another question might be, are girls of color likely to benefit to the same extent that others benefit? So again, those are not all-encompassing recommendations, but just wanted to provide some as we were talking about, being very intentional about applying an intersectional framework to the work that we do. I definitely want to say that I am so appreciative to all of you. Please, I know you're doing great work. Please consider us to be a resource. We definitely want to be in community, be in partnership. So if I or Rights for Girls can be of any help in any capacity, here's my email, not my website, but Rights for Girls website, as well as our social media handles. So please feel free to reach out to us. And again, I just want to thank you. Thank you for the work that all of you are doing to prevent violence against girls, to enhance the safety of girls of color. I know that it's hard. I know that 2020 has been especially hard. So I just wanted to end us on a note that's a little bit more uplifting. And this is a poem from a publication that we released called I'm the Voice, and it contains art and poetry from girls who've been impacted by the legal system. And this particular piece was written by Jordan C. And Jordan tells us, she says, tell them that I frown, but I refuse to try to be crowned. Tell them I'm in pain, I'm hurt, feeling like I'm 6 feet buried in the dirt. Tell them that I'm me, and I always will be me, Jordan C., the real MVP. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Sharice. That was an amazing presentation. We're so happy to have you here today and just get to hear about your super incredible work. And I really appreciate how you center intersectionality in your work and really allow people to understand the ways that violence and systems of oppression can impact people differently based on their identities, especially for girls of color. And I really appreciate how you're teaching us how to push back these narratives and the dehumanization of girls of color and how we can center girls' needs and really provide resources for them. You're doing some really incredible work, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come help and educate us on different systems of oppression, institutionalized racism, sexual abuse prevention, and so much more. And now I would like to transition to do a few JFG announcements before we break. I will now turn our mic over to our incredible board member, Sami Alizadeh, to tell us a little bit more about some exciting JFG launches.
And good morning, everyone. Is my mic working okay? Give me a thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you, Haley. As Haley mentioned, my name is Sami, and I'm a Justice for Girls board member and new girl mom and a deputy prosecuting attorney for King County. I'm so excited to share with you 2 hands-on ways to stay engaged in supporting girl-centered, racially equitable change in our communities and across Washington state. Today, we're proud to launch All In for Girls, a fundraising campaign. From today, November 18th until December 31st, we encourage our community members and folks from around the region to generously give to organizations serving girls. We hope that All In for Girls will inspire a spirit of cooperative giving, an ethic of care for girls so that they can get the support they need not only to survive, but also to thrive. All In for Girls spotlights why girl-centered services are important and why it's important to promote racial equity at this time. Your donation will support organizations that provide trauma-informed care, counseling, services, and skill-building groups that will help build positive relationships, social skills, and life skills. Please join the hashtag AllInForGirls campaign by joining and going to the jfccoalition.org /AllInForGirls, which I believe Tristan has helped, put in the chat for us. The donation pages will be linked to all our participating partners and organizations. So let's get a bunch of our friends and all go in, All In for Girls. Second golden opportunity that I want to highlight today, second opportunity, to stay engaged in supporting change in the upcoming launch is the Justice for Girls new membership program and that is going to launch on December 1st. Joining as a member means growing and showing support for the Justice for Girls advocacy work that continues to build muscle to positively shape policies that help girls who are marginalized by discrimination, poverty, violence, and a male-biased legal system. We also know that services for girls are chronically underfunded, and we want to work to change that advocacy and through this membership program. So here are some high-level details about what it means to become a member. This membership is made available to anyone who is interested in our work and is not limited to people who work in the industry. The cost for an individual membership is $150 a year, and this membership will include the following: exclusive monthly e-newsletters containing such content as Washington State data for girls, legislative updates, community awareness campaigns, ways to become involved in advocacy, and a voter's guide, just to name a few. 10% discount on all summits and trainings. So your future Beyond Pink training and will be at a discount of 10%. And you will have admission to the annual Justice for Girls member happy hour. In addition, the first 25 founding members will receive a gift, which will include an adorable tote bag designed by youth at Black Iconic t-shirts. And I've seen them, they're really nice. So definitely sign up. If you or someone you know would like to join, we will send a sign up information in the email that Tristan will likely send out tomorrow. And we would ask that everyone here, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues who couldn't join us today. We have a lot of amazing people here who are centered work and advocacy, but this membership is not limited to those that are working with our young people in our communities or in our state. So please spread the word. This is another way to support Justice for Girls and another way to support girls in our state. So thank you so much for your time. I won't take up any more of it, but I just wanted to make sure that we knew of, we were able to share some of the really amazing ways that you can get involved. I will pass it back over to Haley. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Miss Sammy. And so now we will break for lunch and we'll reconvene at 1 p.m. But I really want to emphasize that this afternoon session is not to be missed. We will highlight another spectacular youth speaker who will be performing a spoken word poem, and our training will be provided by Andrea Wessel, a sexual health education program specialist at the Washington Office for Superintendent of Public Instruction. This presentation offers a look at foundational practices of sexual violence prevention and how to practically use skills to help organizations create policies and programs that promote violence prevention. So in the meantime, we invite you guys to step away from your computer, go on a little walk, eat some food, make some lunch if you want to, and maybe even participate playing in the online puzzle with other Beyond Pink attendees. And it appears that you guys actually already finished the first puzzle. So we'll be sending another link so that way you guys can do an additional one. Super impressive, by the way. We're happy that you guys are participating and liking that activity. But yeah, so we just invite you to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself during this time. And we'll see everybody back here at 1 p.m. Thank you.